Welcome back to another edition of the Personal Transformation Experience podcast. My name is David Brand.
And I'm Maureen Brand.
And this week we're going to talk about a topic that's really personal for me, and it's the topic of spiritual abuse as a traumatic experience. I think when a lot of people think about abuse, they think about physical abuse commonly. They might think about verbal abuse, getting yelled at by parents or partners or people they work with. Until you met me, how familiar were you with the term spiritual abuse? Had you heard of it?
Not very. I mean, I really didn't. It wasn't in my world, it wasn't really on my radar. It wasn't anything I ever really thought about. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic family. We went to church on Sundays. I made my communion. I got confirmed. I remember in high school, I would argue with the brother because I went to a Catholic high school. And I remember questioning what I was reading in the Bible because, religious class was one of my classes. And I would question the Bible. And I remember kind of arguing with the brothers about that because I was like, this doesn't make sense to me, But there was no abuse per se. I didn't consider religious abuse. I mean, my school was pretty strict.
Yeah.
And, I just figured that's what Catholic school was like, but I felt safe there.
Yeah.
I didn't ever feel unsafe. So no, it was never really on my radar.
That's good. And I think we'll get into it in a minute. There was some differences between our childhood beliefs, right? And how they manifested and how they left us from an inclusion standpoint with our peers. So we'll talk about that in a moment.
Well, 100%. Yeah.
So I think one of the most vivid examples of spiritual abuse that people can relate to, and if you've been around, if you've lived, let's say, at least 50 years at this point, you might be familiar with the People's Temple mass suicide. Jim Jones, November of 1978, over 900 people died.
Yeah.
Most drank this Kool-Aid.
That was in Texas, right?
No, that was in, I believe, in Guyana. Hope I'm saying that correctly. But he moved his group from California because the United States, the feds, they were trying to shut him down, I believe. But this was an example of where people were insulated. They were in a bubble, and they were made to believe that they were God's true children, true group, and they followed, for the most part, they followed the leader, Jim Jones, blindly, blindly. Right. So, and this is where the expression "drinking the Kool-Aid" comes from, right? When you kind of do something everyone else is doing. But there's other examples too, not as up there in severity in terms of people's lives impacted, but you had the Branch Davidian in 1993. I believe 76 people died there. The Solar Temple event, Sweden, France, and Canada, between the three countries, there were 70 dead. Heaven's Gate in San Diego, almost 40 people died in 1997. And then more recently, in the year 2000, 700 died associated with mass suicide from the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments. So you have some really big examples of that. And so I think that's when most people hear about spiritual abuse, they may think about these events like that. But what is not often seen or publicized in the media is the millions of people, whether they're children or adults, that feel trapped by religion. As a child, maybe feel trapped by religion, feel shame and embarrassment over the beliefs and so forth. So I'm gonna dig a little bit more into that personal experience today, and really, I'm not going to focus on a religion. I'm not going to name a religion here. I know you talked about Catholicism, but because I do believe that someone can be a victim of spiritual abuse regardless of the religion. I think there are religious organizations that are more severe in the way they keep their people in that bubble and try and protect them and insulate them from other ideas and thoughts and outside world. And that would definitely be more into the definition of a cult. So
Yeah.
I think
I mean, mine was a cult, but I mean, I will say that there were many times I felt shame around certain ideas. Felt like I had to go and confess my sins,
Right.
because that's how I grew up.
Part of that belief system.
Yeah, that's how I grew up. And, but I had a really hard time reconciling that you could just go confess your sins and you were cleared of them. And then, and I'm like, what about this? I had abuse in my family, and I'm like, how does he get to be cleared of his sins? Like when you abuse children in that way. So I struggled with that whole notion.
That is a fair point. And there is a scripture in the Bible, the Christian Bible talks about, by their fruits you shall know them. So I know there's many times I thought that, okay, this is somebody, whether it's in my own family or somebody else's family, right? They're at church every Sunday, or you see them preaching to others, and yet maybe they're beating their kids at home or beating their spouse.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile? That's a good point. How do you recognize signs of spiritual abuse? I did a little research ahead of time.
Yeah.
And it could be between intimate partners. It could be parents to children. But someone who ridicules or insults the other person's religious beliefs, right? That's spiritual abuse, right? It's not only enforcing, saying, okay, you have to believe what I believe, but making fun of somebody for not believing what you believe too is kind of weaponizing spirituality.
Yeah.
Or preventing someone from practicing their religious or spiritual beliefs, right?
Right.
I mean, sometimes in some countries, right, it's not allowed to practice certain religions.
Right.
Using someone's beliefs to manipulate them or shame them. Or forcing children to be raised in a faith the other partner's not agreed to. That must be really tough. And actually, I do understand that, because when I was 8 years old, both of my parents were in a very insulated religious organization, and my mother decided to leave, and did create a lot of conflict. In fact, my parents ended up not staying together. Using religious texts or beliefs to minimize or rationalize abusive behavior. How many times have we heard people say, and it's not necessarily exactly a Bible quote, but this whole idea of, if you spare the rod, you're spoiling the child, right? So basically trying to use scriptural passages to say why it's okay to beat your children. And I do have more information on that coming up. So really, spiritual abuse can be no less harmful or difficult to somebody as any other type of abuse that we talked about. But it may be more difficult to identify, and often in households where people are being coerced to follow a belief system, it may not be apparent, right? Because you may have been told as a child that we don't talk about what happens in our house, right? And when we're out and when we go to church, we put smiles on, right? And if you step out of line, you might get beat later in the day, but you would pretend, right? You maybe put on airs,
right.
But I think other examples are more subtle, right? Like raising your child in a religion that ostracizes them from their peers in the name of that religion. So one of the clear examples that still resonates with me today is, as a child, the chosen religion of my parents was one that did not celebrate birthdays or holidays. And so therefore, because those types of things were pervasive in elementary school, right? Like making Valentine's Day cards,
Christmas,
making Christmas presents,
even
for
Jewish
each other,
holidays. Yeah.
Right. So anytime that was being done, or if we celebrated the birth of a classmate, I was made to sit outside in the hallway at a desk by myself.
Yeah, that's
while other
awful.
kids walking down the hall would look at me or point at me, and everybody in the classroom knew that I was out there because I was not part of the group. So I was an outsider.
Yeah.
I was an outsider. I wasn't, couldn't be accepted, but I was choosing to put myself out of the circle based on the beliefs of my parents that
it's interesting.
that I was forced to follow.
The school I went to, while it was a parochial school, like it was Catholic school, you didn't have to be Catholic to go, as long as you could pay the tuition,
Right.
Which wasn't cheap, but nobody really, it was a very diverse group of people. I mean, I think that there was probably the greatest population of Hispanic people was bigger than white people. And, we had Hispanic, black, white, all colors. But it didn't really, it was diverse. But I didn't really think of like religion per se about like, I didn't even assume everybody was Catholic. We went to parochial school and I hung out with all these people. Yeah. And so everybody was kind of, there was no ostracizing in that way. So
I don't think you would have went to Catholic school if you didn't celebrate birthdays and holidays.
Exactly. Right. And right. Christmas.
I mean, the religion that.
But it's just interesting. I don't know what, I know what it feels like to be ostracized and bullied. Because I was bullied.
I was bullied as well.
Yeah, I was bullied, but not when I got to Catholic school and I got to high school. I wasn't bullied in high school with the people there. I got bullied outside of high school. It was very interesting. But my early years, I was bullied and ostracized in public school.
Yeah, and part of it wasn't just the being separate from everyone else for going to holidays, but I looked different too. So in the mid-1970s to late 1970s, I'm in school with short hair. I was the only kid that was made to wear a tie for picture day. And back then, kids were wearing their hair down to their shoulders, guys,
right, it was long hair, yeah.
Long hair was in, right? And we were kind of like tail end of hippiedom into disco punk era, all these things. So I'm going to school in a button-down shirt and, imagine basically Forrest Gump, right? At school. That was kind of the way I was dressed and that was the way my hairstyle was. So I definitely stood out, and I felt that, and I think my dad especially was always trying to be helpful. Well, think about the story of Lot and his wife and Sodom and Gomorrah, and how Lot's wife turned around and was turned into a pillar of salt. So you just ignore everybody. Don't look back. Don't look at what everybody's doing,
right.
and just know that you're God's favorite, right? Or one of God's favorites because you're not doing what everyone else is doing.
Right.
But no matter how many times I heard that, it didn't make it easier to be,
imagine
one out of, 1,000 kids that was completely different. And, oh gosh, knocking on doors to proselytize and preach the good news and accidentally not accidentally, but knocking on the door of a classmate, coming to the door and like,
it's embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really hard, that part. And then the other one too was just some of the graphic information and images that I was exposed to at an early age. So I don't know if anybody listening is familiar with the term Armageddon and used in the way it was when I was a small child. It conveyed this idea that God was going to destroy this world, right? And with
That's scary.
Nearly everyone, except for, say, a few of us. And mathematically, the belief was that 99.9% of the world would be destroyed. And I looked at books when I was 3 years old. Books I learned to read on had graphic images of men, women, children, household pets being swallowed up by a fiery, violent earth. And that was.
Do you remember how you felt when that happened? Because I was
scared, right? If I don't, if I'm not perfect or as perfect as I can be, then that's going to be my fate. I'm going to be the one getting swallowed up by the earth. And to this day, even when things don't go well, we talked about catastrophizing last week. When things don't go well, I envision myself being down a deep hole. And even in the book you're holding, I create a whole section of imagery around that, being in a hole with dirt filling in on me.
That's
and
scary.
That came from what I read when I was 3 years old. And in fact, there was a passage in this book that said, dead bodies will be everywhere from one end of the earth to the other. Right? And I'm at 3 years old reading a book.
I can't imagine the trauma.
It was to scare us all, right? To do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It scared
it's
you.
a lasting fear. And so the whole time and later as an adult, when I affirmed myself as actually a member of this religion, I felt I was never good enough. I couldn't keep up with what the requirements were, whether it was preaching or going to our meetings or reading the books that we had to read. It was just too much. And I felt like number one, I felt like there was no time for myself, and dare I think about time for myself. I felt guilty about it. In fact, the scripture in 1 Corinthians 15:58 was just beating everybody. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord. So that meant for me no time for fun and living in a state of fear, obligation, and guilt.
Well, that would make you selfish.
Right. So I couldn't do anything for me. And I think even looking back, not everybody in our religious organization was as devout as my parents were. I say my father because my mother was no longer in the religion at this point. But, I watched other people in the religion like skip a meeting on Sunday, go to a baseball game. But I felt that they were not true believers. And I felt they were people that could be destroyed at Armageddon because they went to a baseball game instead of a meeting, and I was judging people. I learned then to judge,
right?
Because I was judged and I felt judged all the time. But just to make sure everybody understands fear, obligation, and guilt, FOG, it's a good acronym, right? FOG. The fear, right? We talked about, I was scared. I'm going to die at Armageddon if I'm not good enough. That's fear. If I don't do enough and I'm not good enough. And the obligation, I need to do more for God. It's never enough, no matter how much I do. So I have to keep doing more and more and more. And then finally, the guilt part, I should always be doing something that only God approves of right now. My time is his time, and I can't enjoy anything unless I'm doing it for God. To God give all the glory. I'm sure we've heard those things before. So these things were so literally taken and kind of pressed into me. And then the other thing is shame and manipulation, right? I was told constantly, don't read or watch anything unless it's provided and approved by church leaders. And people would feel deep shame sometimes if people were doing things that weren't approved of, and it got to a certain extent, their excommunication was announced from a stage in front of 200 people per se. You imagine you're sitting there, if you're there, even if you're not, and you know that announcement's happening, and so this person is shut out, right? And everybody knows you did something wrong, right? So this whole idea that your sins were laid bare to the world. Yeah. So it was tough.
I can't imagine. I just feel like, I listened to this and I listened because I read you when I first, this is his book he read, David wrote this book, The Everything Kid. And it kind of really does capture all that you experienced as a child in the religious indoctrination and how you were meant to feel and the powerlessness. Like I can only read I read the first version and I read some of the second version because you wrote you had a few drafts, but I really struggle. I was looking at it earlier today and I get so triggered by that sense of powerlessness that I want to seek revenge on the people that hurt you. And that's how I grew up, right? So I have to take a deep breath and not be, because it sickens me that you were abused at the hands of your parents in the name of a religion. Physically abused, mentally, emotionally abused, neglected. It was just awful. And they believe that this is what they were doing. And I don't believe for 1 second that they didn't think that somewhere in their body that this is not right. I just don't believe that. Maybe I don't choose to believe that, but I can't imagine having power over a child and abusing and using that power to abuse the child and force the child to do things that they didn't want to do and just being cruel and causing that kind of pain and humiliation and shame in a small child that doesn't have anywhere to go. I get seethingly angry about it. And, I had to prepare myself before I sat down here and talked to you about it because I was I want to fucking jump on a plane, go to where they live and seek revenge. Because I just don't believe that they really believe that this is good for him in the name of religion. That's fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
I can't.
So, yeah, I'm not doing this episode as a form of catharsis or as a form of pointing a finger at how my parents or anything
no,
like
I know.
that. Yeah.
I know. But
I'm trying to create awareness, right?
Right.
That
But this is very hard for me to hear. Like, and even when I think about my own childhood, like this is all because this is a part of me that obviously I need to continue to work with because it's getting triggered in the name of powerlessness. You know, I felt powerless as a child myself when I was being beaten and abused. I was just, you know, I was little and I couldn't scream back. I couldn't fight back. And, you know, it was like you weren't allowed to feel, you weren't allowed to show emotion. If you cried, you got hit more. Like, stop crying, you know, and you kept getting hit until you stop crying. How do you stop crying when you're constantly being hit? Like, how, you know, like it doesn't make sense to me. So when I think about my own childhood, that's why I have that trigger. Because I had that sense of powerlessness. And even today, in today's world, when I feel like a sense of powerless or somebody has power over me and is treating me wrong, or my child, oh my God. Like all thought, rational thought leaves my head and I am just like, I'll get bad.
So it's
bad.
so it's not even because you have an idea of a religious structure telling the parents what to do, and then the parents telling the child what to do, or just telling people to do, whether they're parents or not, and then holding over people this idea: if you don't do exactly as we instruct you to, then we're going to remove you from a member of the group, right? So you have no personal autonomy. So I just want to be clear: we're not just talking about abused children here.
No,
it's abused people too, right? Albeit they let themselves get there. Now, the why behind that, I'm not prepared to discuss today because I think there's so many valid reasons for why people fall into these types of situations when they allow, you know, themselves to be abused by a partner or abused by a religious organization or abused by an employer, right? There's something going on there, right? They fear, and I heard this in the religion, like, well, yeah, I know it's not perfect, but where else are we going to go, right? This is the best there is out there, right? And I've heard people in abusive relationships say, where am I going to go? My spouse takes care of me,
right?
You know, and things like that, right? So
there
are some powerful holds over people here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you give yourself over to that power, and that's, you know, even as an adult, when you come from that environment as a child and you feel that sense of powerlessness and you feel like I'm not good enough to take care of myself, I'm not good enough, so I need these boundaries, I need someone to, like, you know, tell me what to do or have that power because that's familiar. It's not good, it doesn't make them feel good, but it's familiar and they don't know anything else. That's the sad part. And that's where, you know, I grew up feeling like I will never, ever allow anybody to have power over me in that way or my child. So I do have very intense, strong feelings about it that I have to keep in check and know that, you know, keep myself in charge and take care of those parts that feel that pain because they're still in pain, and I just have to constantly, like, remind them, okay, we're all grown up, no one's going to do that, you're not a little girl anymore, no one's going to have power over you, I got you, you know, you're safe. So that's super important, I think, to remember. But yeah, when you grew up in that way and that kind of intense shame and being bullied and feeling like, you know, you can't fit in even if you want to. Like you're not allowed to. You have to look differently. You have to,
And there was a lot of control, right, and intimidation around this, right?
Yeah.
So it is. I felt very much like it was a form of mind control. So it was all about what I was thinking. Sometimes not even what I was doing, but I felt guilt over things I was thinking.
Right. You couldn't even think. Like, you know, not only weren't allowed to feel emotions, you weren't allowed to think autonomously. You weren't allowed to.
No, we were told constantly, God is reading your mind every second.
Oh my God!
Right? And God reads your mind every second. God sees what you're doing every second, right? You know, and so it creates a paranoia.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I can't think that. I can't do this, and you know, people crack. And you know, I am going to get into that a little bit here, and I want to be very clear, though, that I am not sitting here and saying there is anything wrong with the spiritual path. I think it's a great thing for someone to be in a spiritual path.
Yes.
Whatever that looks like for the individual. And I personally do have a belief in a higher power. Although I do know of and have known many people who were spiritually abused as children or adults that have stopped believing in God as a result of it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, to each his own. I'm not going to sit here, and I'm not sitting here arguing against any belief system. That there's plenty of information out there for everyone to do their own research. So
Right. I mean, as long as you're safe
and not harming others,
and
right?
not harming others, like there's no reason, you believe what you want to believe. And if you're being safe and you feel good and it gives you a sense of well-being and health and, joy, then absolutely, but I think the minute that, you try to force your beliefs on others and
even somebody says well, if you don't follow Jesus, you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. That is a form of spiritual abuse.
Yeah, that's not right.
And that's not for you to decide.
No,
right?
That's for the individual. Right.
Well, if you believe in Jesus or God, then you would believe that that's for them to decide, right? If that's your belief, it's not for you to say who's going to hell or heaven or whatever it is you believe.
Yeah,
so
you're not God.
That's one of the things I had to teach my kids is like people walk up to them on the street. You don't have to talk to people about you don't know about what you believe. Number one, that's your personal business.
I mean, I know this is a controversial topic, especially right now, but I don't really care. I think that it's important that it's spoken about. I think it's a good topic to talk about, and I think that we have to really draw the line and have boundaries between spiritual abuse and a healthy spiritual relationship with whatever you want to call it, with yourself
right?
and your God or whatever you want to call God, and the whatever it is that you call God or a higher power.
Yeah,
and that's okay. But
I don't judge people who don't have any belief.
Yeah, it's a choice.
Whether I agree or not,
it should always be a choice.
Right.
It should always be a choice, and you should do it in a way that makes you feel good and
you're free to believe whatever you want to believe in my book, as long as you're not hurting me or
anybody
other people.
else.
Right. So talking about hurting other people, right? We talked about the discipline side, right? People who have children, using the scripture in Proverbs 13:24. Those who spare the rod hate the child, but those who love them are diligent to discipline them. And I've done a lot of research in this, and many people share my belief. This passage in the Bible does not imply that you should be taking a literal rod or a switch or a stick or a belt and hitting your child with it. But yes, you want to teach your child that there's consequences of actions, but how do you do that? And we've talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
Right. How do you have conversation with your children? And I believe it goes back to the same thing you have with adults. Listen to understand.
Yes. Yes. You
let your children feel heard.
Kids need boundaries, but they don't need to be beaten
right.
to understand them. I mean, you teach them. You teach them through modeling your own behavior, that you model the behavior you want them to see. Children will do what you do more than do what you say.
Right.
So whatever they see you doing.
And whether you bring them to church or not every Sunday, that you have to set them up. If you bring them to church every Sunday and then you go home and go on an alcoholic binge Sunday afternoon and beat everybody, then you're actually probably going to have the opposite effect. And your child's going to be like, why do I want to go to church? Yeah, why do I want to even be in this? Yeah, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Hypocrisy, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we raised our kids, we exposed them to, Christianity and other religions. And
our children
let
had
them make a choice.
Feelings as they went along into their teen years, because they're all in their 20s now, but they had feelings about it. At one point, it's like, hey, why are you taking us to church? Why are you making us go to church? We heard that, and we were very active, and we had a group. We used to go out and have the kids do nice things in the community. So for me, and I believe you agree, it was a way of educating them.
Yes,
right?
We educated them,
about
they had
beliefs,
children's church.
Beliefs, Christianity. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why we chose the church that we went to is because they had a children's church.
Right.
And I used to teach at the children's church. You taught at the children's church. So while the adults were upstairs enjoying mass and, enjoying time, the kids were downstairs doing children's church. And there would be a volunteer every week to teach children's church. And so I thought, I love that about it because, first of all, to expect, especially my child, I mean, I have a child, with disability. I mean, she's autistic, ADHD, and, it's like, she's not going to be able to sit there for 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, and sit still. Like, I remember, struggling with that big
And by
time.
the way, I was brought to an outdoor gathering when I was 3 years old in July. when it was like 85, 90 degrees every day for, I think it was 7 straight days for 8 hours a day.
Oh my God.
So you talk about kids getting through a 40-minute sermon, that kind of makes me laugh, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, but that's abuse. That to me should not have happened to a 3-year-old. And it's ridiculous to expect a 3-year-old to do that. Just my opinion.
Yeah, if they couldn't,
you could disagree.
They couldn't make it.
I don't care.
Yeah, actually, you just reminded me when I was a child and we had long, gatherings or meetings. Kids who acted up, squirmed, whatever they did, they got taken downstairs and got beat, and we could all hear them getting beat.
Yeah, that's
to beat them into compliance.
Okay, I really can't. I really can't.
Getting back to the right way to do it. So listen to understand, validate your child's feelings. That's what I was trying to segue into, is that our children told us at one point, like, hey, I'm not sure I want to go to church anymore. So why do you feel that way?
Yes.
Right.
We had the conversation. Right. We asked
allowed them the space to ask the question.
Yes.
We didn't say, how dare you ask that? No, that's not an option, right? Or as some parents do, if you're living in my house, you must do this, right? That doesn't create great relationships.
Yeah,
usually.
no, we explored their reasons and we asked them if they wanted to go someplace else or try, what is it they believe, what they don't believe, what was it they didn't like about it. We talked about other religions, we talked about Judaism, and I think Buddhism, and I don't know if there was anything else.
So we gave them the space to voice their questions about the beliefs and the concerns, right, and explore that. So I think that's valid, right, because whatever somebody's spiritual path is, I really believe they need to come to it on their own. If they feel they came to it because of their parents' choice or they're coerced into it, then it's not. It doesn't take hold.
It was
in their
about
heart.
Education and teaching them how to make a choice about it, and exploring their feelings about it and emotions about it.
So they could make an informed choice,
right? And leaving the door open for them to be honest with themselves and just truthful. There was you didn't have to lie, right? I mean, we were open to.
Right.
Nobody was getting in trouble. It was just we invited the conversation because we think it's an important part. And
give them space for the discussion.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that I think, I still believe was really, really the right thing to do. And I do think that there's a lot of good that's done by religious organizations and churches and spiritual groups in this world.
Absolutely.
Whether it's feeding the homeless, soup kitchens, bringing clothes to the needy, things like that, are all good causes. And I do personally believe that if you're a religious organization that gets a tax exemption, you should have a requirement to do a certain amount of time in the community, like community service and things. It should be tied. You shouldn't be able to get a break from being a financially contributing member of society and then be insulated and live in a bubble where you're cut off from everybody else. So that's a whole nother.
I mean,
if you want to fill up the tax coffer, start taxing religious groups who don't give back. Yeah,
I didn't really have any negative experiences with Catholic school. I don't remember doing any community service though, which is interesting. I don't know why we didn't do that. Now looking back, it would have been pretty cool to do something like that. Like I was never exposed to that.
That is interesting.
Not even my own family.
But you had to pay for Catholic school, but they were tax exempt, but you paid for the school. So I don't know. That is interesting. Although I would argue too, though, that, some of those communities in New York where, there were just based on the cultural heritage of people, so many of them were Catholic, they were probably all doing things for each other anyway, whether sharing things from their garden, so I think, or helping someone out, like someone in the church, like needed help putting a roof on, or, there was always so much. So the positive, support.
I had positive. My grandfather and my grandmother went to the church down the street from our house. I used to, because he was legally blind, I used to go there with him, like walk to church with him every day, every Sunday. I thought the father that did this, oh my God, I could picture his face. He was there, and I had a great experience with him. I remember helping my grandfather doing certain things through the church, like for the blind, making ceramics and just raising money. My grandmother liked to go to, like, there was a community hall downstairs. She liked to do things there, like they did bingos and stuff like that. to raise money for the church.
That's
So
true.
there
Bingo
was
night. Even the
Yeah.
what do you different feasts, right?
Yeah.
Like even
different feasts, right? We'd bring food every once in a while. So we did have some stuff. Now
there
that
was
it's all coming back
and
now.
yeah, Italian
I didn't-
fest and things like
Yeah,
that.
I
Right?
didn't remember
that
it.
the church would be involved in. So
Yeah.
there was a lot there. So I mean, I think some good examples there.
Yeah, Christ the King. I know a good friend of mine, her mom was very heavily involved in there with them. And so, yeah, we did do some stuff there that I remember with my grandfather because I used to go with him every Sunday. And yeah.
So I think this is a hot topic for everyone, and well, I shouldn't say everyone. That's generalizing, but
for most people,
if you've experienced this, it's definitely a hot button topic. And I would encourage you if you want to reach out to me personally. You've got our email address. It's on our YouTube page, and you can feel free to leave comments.
Yeah, I would
below the
encourage
video.
everybody to read this. This, while it's a powerful book,
Some people have said it was very hard to read.
It was
because
hard
there
for
is
me.
Some fairly somewhat
Everything
graphic
Kid.
description of some abusive moments.
It is, but you know what? I mean, my first read, I couldn't put it down. I was like, because I didn't know these things about you, and I know a lot of times, like you'll try to tell me something that happened, I can't hear it. It's too painful for me to hear, and it's very triggering. But I read through this book, and I couldn't put it down. I mean, I was crying, I was laughing, I was, and because I know you, so it was just that kind of read for me. But I just felt like it really does capture. Like when you grow up in this kind of environment, you feel like you need to be everything to everybody. Like you become this people pleaser to the 10th degree.
That's really what it was about, right?
Yeah, people pleaser.
I was last, right?
Yeah.
Every decision that I had to, whenever I had to in my head think, okay, what do I do in this situation? Whatever I want to do was the last thing I thought about.
Right. And so I think it's important to remember how this shapes you in your adult life. I mean, I remember talking about decisions. We had a podcast about this and how it's so difficult to make a good decision because we had no idea how. The choices of partners that we who we went for, like the kind of partner we looked for, was all about people pleasing or fixing them.
Yeah.
And then how to make a good decision in general.
Right.
We had no idea. How do we become good parents? I just knew what I didn't want to do, which
Right.
I guess is a start. But I was, when you become a parent, everything about your child will trigger you any unhealed trauma.
Oh yeah, well even like you're getting triggered based on me having this discussion today, right? And triggered when you read the book, and that's going to happen. And I would say, for those who have read it or going to read it and they feel triggered, then that's a good
way because it's
say,
great information.
What is
When you
triggering
feel
me?
triggered, now I used to run away from those feelings, but when you do feel triggered, I think it's important to explore the part that's being triggered. And this opens up, to any kind of something's going on, like somebody was some part of you had some kind of adverse experience as a child. That's why you're being triggered. So it's a great way to get that kind of information. So absolutely. It's a great book.
Okay. Well, anything else you want to add before we wrap up for this week?
No, that's it. I think.
Okay. So again, if you like this episode, please hit the like button. Please feel free to subscribe because it tells YouTube that you found benefit in our content, and we'll get the content pushed out to more people so you can benefit others as well. And visit our Instagram page at Personal Transformation EXP. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great week.
Feel free to ask questions or comment.
Thank you.